An 11-year-old girl sketched in her notebook on a sunny Pasadena street, 2 blocks from home. She didn't see the patrol car shadowing her every move. Inside a nearby market, her father, Jason Statham, heard the first shout, then the unthinkable. The Pasadena sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, the kind that made the jacaranda trees look like purple fire against the historic Craftsman homes. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically across manicured lawns, and the air smelled of cut grass and warm asphalt. 11-year-old Chloe Statham walked with a focused slowness, her honey-colored curls bouncing around a face deep in concentration. In her hands, she held a hardcover sketchbook with a metallic clasp that glinted in the afternoon sun. She was perfecting the shading on a drawing of the family's bulldog, Winston, and was only 2 blocks from the iron gate of her home. She was so absorbed, she didn't register the black and white cruiser that had slowed to a crawl just behind her. A block away, inside a small community market with artisanal cheeses and fresh squeeze juices, Jason Statham was deciding between sparkling and spring water. Dressed in a simple gray Henley shirt and dark cargo pants, he was just another dad on an errand. But his senses, honed by years of discipline most people couldn't imagine, were always active. He heard the sudden, aggressive rev of an engine outside, followed by a sharp, commanding voice that sliced through the peaceful afternoon. His head snapped up. Then he heard the scream, a thin, terrified sound that vaporized the world around him. It was Chloe, on the sidewalk. Chloe had looked up, startled, to see 2 officers exiting their vehicle. The older one, Officer Miller, had a weary, cynical look, his hand already resting on his holstered weapon. The younger one, Officer Davis, was a bundle of nervous energy, his eyes wide and darting. "Let me see your hands." "Now," Miller barked. Chloe froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What? Don't move. Drop what's in your hand," Davis shouted, his voice cracking as he advanced, pulling his firearm. Confused, she looked down at her sketchbook and the silver drawing pen she held. The sun caught the metallic clasp and the polished pen, creating a brief, sharp flash of light. "It's just my book," she tried to explain, her voice barely a whisper. "I said drop it." She fumbled, her small hands clumsy with fear. But she wasn't fast enough. In that single, sickening heartbeat, Davis flinched at the glint of silver. Pop, pop. Inside the market, Jason heard the shots. Time stopped. The water bottle slipped from his grasp and shattered on the floor. He didn't feel the glass or the water. He moved, a blur of coiled muscle and pure instinct, bursting through the glass door and onto the street. And then he saw it. His daughter, his Chloe, crumpled on the pristine sidewalk, a crimson flower blooming on her light blue t-shirt. The world didn't tilt. It fractured into a million pieces of burning rage. The officers were still aiming their weapons at her small, still form, yelling commands that no longer made sense. Miller nudged her backpack aside with his boot. Jason's vision tunneled. Everything went silent except the roaring in his ears. He crossed the street in a sprint that was impossibly fast, a shadow closing the distance before either officer could process his arrival. Davis spun around. "Sir, stay back. This isn't active." Crack. It wasn't a punch. It was a perfectly placed palm heel strike to the jaw. Davis's head snapped back, and he collapsed, unconscious before he hit the pavement. Miller reached for his radio, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He never made it. Jason's hand clamped around the officer's wrist like a vice, twisting it at an unnatural angle, forcing the gun to clatter to the ground. A single, brutal knee strike to the ribs followed, and Miller folded with a choked gasp, slamming against the hood of the squad car before sliding to the ground, gasping for air. A faint groan escaped Chloe's lips. That sound, it was the only thing that mattered. Jason was instantly at her side. "Chloe, baby, look at me. I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain and confusion. "Daddy, I'm here. You're going to be okay," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the chaos. His hands were already working, applying pressure to the wound with a practiced calm that defied the inferno in his soul. "Don't move." Just breathe with me. Breathe. Neighbors were spilling from their houses, phones held high, their faces etched with horror. A voice cut through the rising murmur. My God, that's Jason Statham. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Backup was coming. Jason didn't care. He glanced at the two neutralized officers, then back at his daughter's pale face. He wasn't crying, but the cold, controlled fire in his eyes was a promise. It was a look that would haunt those men for the rest of their lives. Paramedics swarmed the scene minutes later, a chaotic ballet of red and blue lights washing over the tranquil street. Jason never left Chloe's side. As they carefully lifted her onto a stretcher, his hand remained locked with hers, a silent, unbreakable connection. He walked alongside them, a stoic guardian, all the way to the ambulance. As the doors were about to close, he turned to face the arriving police commander, a man whose face he vaguely recognized from a charity event years ago. Two of your officers, Jason said, his voice deceptively calm, yet laced with the chilling precision of a surgeon's scalpel, just shot an unarmed 11-year-old girl who was drawing in her sketchbook. He paused, letting the weight of the words hang in the air. He didn't know who she was. That shouldn't have mattered. Without another word, he climbed into the back of the ambulance, the doors shutting him in with the sound of his daughter's fragile heartbeat on the monitor. Back at the precinct, the situation detonated. The body cam footage from both officers was pulled immediately. It was damning. It showed two cops escalating a situation with a child from 0 to 100 with no provocation, no threat, no justification. The sketchbook, with its innocent drawings, was painfully clear in Chloe's hand. By nightfall, a leak from an outraged desk sergeant had sent the footage to a local news affiliate. The story exploded. LAPD shoots child in Pasadena. Victim is Jason Statham's daughter. Social media became a wildfire of fury. Hashtag Justice for Chloe trended globally within an hour. Memes of Statham's movie characters with captions like they picked the wrong dad went viral. The public's reaction was swift and merciless. They didn't just see a celebrity's child. They saw their own. Jason remained silent, a ghost in the sterile, white waiting room outside the ICU. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, electronic beep of the heart monitor that was tethered to his daughter's life. He sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, a mountain of contained power brought low by a single, senseless act. A surgeon had come out earlier, his face grim. The bullet had missed her heart by less than a centimeter. She's incredibly lucky, the doctor had offered, trying to provide some comfort. Jason hadn't responded. Luck hadn't saved her. It had only given him a chance to fight back. This wasn't an accident. This was a declaration of war. His teenage son, Leo, arrived and sat beside him, his face pale with shock. Why? Why would they shoot her? He asked, his voice cracking. For a long moment, Jason didn't answer. He reached into the pink backpack the paramedics had given him, pulled out Chloe's sketchbook, and opened it to the last page. It was a pencil drawing of him. He was standing tall, arms folded, a slight, almost imperceptible smile on his face. Below the drawing, in Chloe's looping, careful handwriting, were the words, "My dad is a superhero. He doesn't need a cape, just a calm heart." A muscle in Jason's jaw tightened. "I wasn't calm today," he whispered, his voice thick with a pain that went deeper than rage. "But you were there," Leo insisted, his own eyes filling with tears. "You stopped them." Jason looked from the drawing of the hero his daughter saw to the glass door of the ICU where she lay fighting for her life. "No," he said, the word as cold and hard as steel. "I'm just getting started." The next day, Jason Statham walked into a hastily arranged press conference at the hospital. He wasn't flanked by publicists or agents. He walked alone, dressed in a simple black sweater. His face was a mask of grim focus. The room was a chaotic frenzy of flashing cameras and shouted questions. He stepped up to the podium and raised a hand. The room fell into an immediate, expectant silence. "My daughter is in stable condition," he began, his voice steady, devoid of the theatrical emotion the reporters craved. "The doctors are hopeful, but hope is not what I'm here to talk about." He scanned the room, his gaze so intense it felt like he was making eye contact with every single person. Last night, I received calls from the mayor, the chief of police, even the governor. They all offered their apologies. They all promised a full investigation. But their promises ring hollow because they are asking the wrong questions. He leaned forward slightly, his knuckles white on the podium. They ask, how could this have happened to Jason Statham's daughter? The question we should be asking is, what if she wasn't my daughter? What if there was no famous father to ignite a media firestorm? What if there were no cameras, no viral videos, no public outrage? What would have happened to that little girl then? He let the question hang in the air, a damning indictment. She would be just another statistic, another name on a forgotten file, her case buried under the weight of standard procedure and justified fear. Not this time. This time, the world is watching. He turned and walked away from the podium without answering a single question, leaving a room of stunned journalists in his wake. That evening, he met with his legal team, led by the formidable civil rights attorney, Elena Ramirez. She was known for taking on impossible cases against corrupt institutions and winning. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. They're circling the wagons, she said, her tone sharp. The police union is already crafting a narrative. They're going to paint Officer Davis as a rookie who panicked and Miller as a veteran who made a split-second error in judgment. They will try to make this about individual failure to protect the system. Jason nodded slowly. The system is the target. A full lawsuit is already being drafted, Elena confirmed. Civil, federal, state. We'll hit them on every front. We'll demand policy changes, retraining protocols, and independent oversight. I want more, Jason said, his voice low. I want their badges. Permanently. Elena met his gaze. You're not just going after their jobs. You're aiming for their careers, their pensions, their entire future. No, Jason corrected her, his eyes like chips of flint. I'm going after the culture of impunity that allows two armed men to see a child with a sketchbook as a mortal threat. I'm going after every single person who trained them, who supervised them, and who will now try to protect them. Meanwhile, the storm he had unleashed was battering the LAPD from all sides. A public petition demanding officers Miller and Davis be fired and criminally charged surpassed 1 million signatures in 48 hours. Protesters began gathering daily outside the precinct. The internal pressure was immense. Officer Davis's family had reportedly gone into hiding after receiving death threats. Miller, the veteran, found himself completely isolated, his so-called brothers in blue now viewing him as a liability. They thought the media frenzy was the worst of it. They were wrong. They hadn't yet understood that Jason Statham, when silent, was at his most dangerous. He wasn't just a grieving father anymore. He was a symbol, a lightning rod for a generation's worth of anger. And he had the world's undivided attention. On the 5th day, the sterile quiet of the hospital room was broken by a single, whispered word. Daddy. Jason, who had been sitting vigil in a chair by her bed, was on his feet in an instant, his hand gently taking hers. He had barely slept, subsisting on black coffee and sheer force of will. I'm here, Chloe. I'm right here, Angel. Chloe's eyes, though still shadowed with pain, were clear. She managed a weak smile. I heard you, she said, her voice raspy. On the TV. You were loud. He smoothed her hair back from her forehead, his touch incredibly gentle. Was I? You stopped them, she whispered, her gaze unwavering. The bad man. A wave of emotion, so powerful it almost buckled him, washed over Jason. He had replayed the events 1,000 times, the rage and the violence. But in her eyes, there was no judgment, only trust. You stopped them, Chloe, he said, his voice thick. You stayed alive. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. She squeezed his hand faintly. You're still my superhero, she murmured before drifting back to sleep. He stood there for a long time, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. Her words weren't just a comfort. They were a command. They solidified his resolve, transforming his white-hot anger into a cold, diamond-hard purpose. He wasn't just fighting for vengeance anymore. He was fighting to be the man his daughter believed him to be. That same afternoon, the first crack appeared in the LAPD's wall of defense. Under immense pressure from the district attorney's office, which was itself buckling under the weight of public outrage, Officer Casey Davis was arrested at his home. News helicopters captured the footage. The young, terrified officer, stripped of his uniform and authority, being led away in handcuffs. He looked like a boy, lost and broken. Officer Miller was placed on indefinite, unpaid leave, pending further investigation, a clear sign that the department was beginning to cut its losses. The news of the arrest spread like a shockwave. For the protesters outside the hospital, it was a victory. Their chants grew louder, more hopeful. Justice for Chloe. One down, one to go. Jason watched the news report on the small television in Chloe's room, his expression unreadable. Elena Ramirez called him moments later. "This is the first step, Jason," she said. "They sacrificed the rookie to appease the crowd. Now we go after the veteran. We go after the system." "Good," Jason said simply, his eyes drifting back to his sleeping daughter. He didn't feel triumph, only a grim satisfaction. This wasn't a celebration. It was a single battle won in a much larger war. But for the first time in 5 agonizing days, as he watched his daughter breathe peacefully, he allowed himself a flicker of something he hadn't felt since he heard the gunshots. Hope. The fight was far from over, but now he knew they could win. 3 weeks later, the downtown Los Angeles courthouse felt like the epicenter of an earthquake. A cordon of police officers held back a massive crowd of reporters, protesters, and supporters. Signs bobbed above the sea of heads. A sketchbook is not a weapon. Badge is not a license to kill. Statham speaks for US all. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity, the air thick with tension. At the defense table, former officers Brent Miller and Casey Davis sat in ill-fitting suits, their faces pale and drawn. They looked smaller, stripped of their uniforms and authority. They stared resolutely at the polished wood of the table, avoiding the dozens of eyes burning into them. Across the aisle sat Jason Statham, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit. He was a figure of immense, controlled stillness. Beside him, holding his hand, was Chloe. Her arm was in a sling, but her back was straight, and her eyes were clear and steady. Behind them sat Leo and their powerhouse attorney, Elena Ramirez. The trial was a formality in many ways. The evidence was irrefutable. Elena Ramirez presented the case with brutal efficiency. The bodycam footage was played on a large screen, and a collective gasp went through the courtroom as the pop of the gunshots echoed in the silent room. Bystander videos showed Jason's swift, precise takedown of the officers. The 911 calls from terrified neighbors painted a picture of chaos and disbelief. The defense attorneys tried to argue that the officers feared for their lives, that the flash of light from Chloe's sketchbook could have been mistaken for a weapon. But under Ramirez's sharp cross-examination, their arguments crumbled. "You see a weapon, Officer Miller?" she asked, pausing the video on a clear frame of Chloe holding her pen. "I saw the metallic glint. In a tense situation, you have to make a split-second decision to shoot an 11-year-old girl in the back. Is it the training the LAPD provides?" The room was silent, but the moment that shattered the last vestiges of the defense came when the prosecution called its final witness. The prosecution calls Chloe Statham to the stand. A murmur swept through the gallery. The judge leaned forward, his expression concerned. "Counselor, are you certain about this?" Elena looked at Jason. He gave a slight nod. She insisted, "Your Honor." With quiet dignity, Chloe walked to the witness stand. Her small feet barely touched the floor as she sat down. After being sworn in, she turned not to the lawyers, but to the jury. "I was walking home from my art class," she began, her voice soft but clear, carrying through the hushed courtroom. "I was drawing a picture of my dog. I like drawing. It makes me happy." She paused, taking a breath. Then the policeman started yelling. I was scared. I didn't know what I did wrong. Tears were welling in the eyes of a woman on the jury. He told me to drop it. I looked at my book and my pen. She looked directly at Casey Davis. I tried to tell him it was just a book, but he didn't listen. Her voice trembled for the first time. One second I was thinking about what color to make the sky in my drawing, and the next Everything was hot and loud, and I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die. She then turned her gaze to her father. A small, brave smile touched her lips. And then I saw my dad. He ran right to me. He wasn't yelling. He just held my hand and told me to breathe with him. He made me feel safe, even with all the blood. She looked back at the jury, her expression earnest and wise beyond her years. They had the guns, she said simply, but he was the strong one. The courtroom was utterly still. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the defense attorneys seemed to understand that their case was not just lost, but annihilated. The judge, visibly moved, cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Statham. You may step down." Back in the hallway, reporters swarmed them. Jason shielded Chloe with his body, moving them toward the exit. One reporter managed to shout, "Mr. Statham, what message do you have for the police?" Jason stopped. He turned, his eyes like ice. "My message isn't for the police. It's for the parents. Teach your children that a uniform doesn't automatically make someone a hero. And if they ever feel unsafe, tell them to run." The jury deliberated for less than 90 minutes. The verdict came back on all counts. Guilty. At the sentencing hearing a week later, the judge delivered a blistering condemnation of the officers' actions, calling them a catastrophic failure of judgment and a betrayal of the public trust. Brent Miller and Casey Davis were each sentenced to 10 years in state prison, stripped of their pensions, and permanently barred from ever serving in law enforcement. But the judge added a final, unprecedented condition. He ordered both men to stand and deliver a personal apology to Chloe Statham in open court. Casey Davis went first, his voice choked with sobs, his words a rambling mess of panic and regret. "I'm so sorry. I was scared. I didn't know." Then it was Miller's turn. The veteran officer, his face ashen, stood and faced the 11-year-old girl whose life he had nearly ended. "I failed in my duty to protect and serve," he said, his voice a monotone. "There is no excuse." When he was finished, the room was silent, expecting a response from the family. Instead, Chloe's clear voice cut through the stillness. She looked directly at them and said, "You didn't need to know I was a child. You just needed to see I wasn't a threat." That single sentence, delivered with an unnerving calm, landed with more force than any legal argument. It would be quoted in every newspaper, a simple, profound truth that defined the entire case. Outside the courthouse, Jason didn't gloat. He stood before the cameras, not as an action hero, but as a father who had been to hell and back. "Today, the system worked," he said, "but it only worked because the world was watching. There are thousands of other children who don't have a famous father or a viral video. My fight is for them now." He then announced the official launch of the Chloe Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to funding mandatory de-escalation training for police departments nationwide and providing legal support for families affected by police brutality. The headlines the next day were unanimous. From vengeance to vision. Statham forges new legacy from pain. The father who broke a corrupt system without throwing a punch. Days later, Jason was sitting on the back porch of their Pasadena home as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Chloe came out and sat beside him, her sketchbook in her lap. Her arm was out of the sling. "Drawing again?" he asked softly. She nodded, flipping to a new page. It was a picture of the two of them, holding hands, looking at a sunset. But in this one, she was wearing a flowing red cape. He was just in his sweater. He smiled. "How can we get the cape this time?" She looked up at him, her eyes bright with a wisdom she had earned far too young. "Because you taught me that real superheroes don't stop the bad guys," she said. "They help everyone else get back up." He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. The fight had changed him. It had woken something deeper than the protector. It had woken the builder. The father the world truly needed to see. This family's fight changed a city. But the conversation is far from over. What do you think is the most crucial step for real reform? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, please like and subscribe. And as always, when you comment, please be respectful. Let's build a community dedicated to change.